Okay, recording now. So we have our play button, so we can run our code and then see the visual output of it on the right-hand side. Stop is just going to stop running the code. And then you can do auto refresh, which means like if this is running and there you make a change, say we want to draw a rectangle. Then it'll auto refresh and draw it automatically. I don't really like doing this mainly because if I make a mistake or something in my code and have like a broken loop that loops infinitely, then it could crash the browser. So I generally like not doing auto refresh and just hitting play and stop. Whenever you create a new sketch, it's going to generate a random name for it. So here you could change that, click on it and say, okay, creative coding week 1 demo. So once we have that, I'll be more specific, spring 2023. Then save it, saves it to my account. I can reference it again. Oh yeah, and if you click on your name, then you can go to my sketches, my collections, my assets, your settings, and log out. So my sketches is where all these sketches live. So anything that I save is going to live here. Below that, there's a little gear. These are just different settings. If you want the text to be bigger, you can do that. If you like dark mode, you can do that. Go back. There's accessibility options. Autosave is set to on. That's probably good to do. Word wrap is set to on. I prefer word wrap too. So yeah. And below all that, we have on the left-hand side, this is our coding area. This is where we write all of our code. This is where we program. To the left of that, we have numbers for each line. Above that, there's a little arrow. These are all our files. So there's a index.html file, which is a file that every website needs to have. The one that we mainly are focusing on is just sketch.js. So that's really the only one that you need to touch, unless you're using like a third-party platform or playing around with. You can do p5js and work with DOM elements, which are like HTML elements, but we're not really going to do much of that in this class. So everything is going to be just, for the most part, generated in this canvas area. So to the right of that, this is the preview area, which is going to display our canvas, which will show all the visual elements that are related and generated by our code. Below our coding area this is called the console. And this is where it will show us any error messages, anything that's wrong with our code. It's going to pop up here. You could also say, like, if you wanted to generate or display the value of like the position of something as it's moving across the screen, just so you know, like, what those values are, you can print to console. So you can print values to the console. Yeah, so that's definitely helpful. And that's essentially it. That's kind of the overview of what's going on here. So every time you create a new sketch, it's going to automatically give you this code. So there's two main functions in here. There's a setup function and a draw function. The setup function is going to run once when you hit play. So it's just going to go through it once. The draw function is an infinite loop. So when you hit play, it's going to loop through this infinitely over and over and over again until you hit stop. For the first 7 weeks, we're not going to use the draw function at all. we're just going to focus on setup because we're not doing anything with animation or interactivity. But I could show you just real quick how like it works. So if we wanted to say draw a rectangle, so for this example, it's easy to use random values between 400 and between 0 and 400 for the X random. So you don't have to do this, but this is just an example to show you what happens in the loop. For the Y, random width between 0 and 100. Let's make it between 10 and 100. And random height between 10 and 100. So if I play this, and because it's in the draw, it's going to constantly loop through this and constantly draw a new rectangle each frame. So every frame, it's looping through it and drawing a new rectangle. The only reason why we're seeing one is because we're also drawing a background color on top of it. So if I got rid of that completely, then we'll see every single one that's being drawn over the entire period of time that the sketch is running. So that's what's going on in the draw loop. So it's an infinite loop, essentially. It's constantly looping through the code, and every time it loops through it, it's drawing, in this case, a rectangle in a random location with a random size associated to it. But again, we're not going to be using that for the first 7 weeks. We're just going to focus on setup, which is just runs once, and that's it. Okay, so let's just do a couple things. Create a background. We'll talk a little bit more about color and grayscale and forms and shapes and the week 2 lecture video. But I'll just kind of play around with it just to give you a sense of how it's could be used. So by default, it's the value is going to be between, for color, is going to be between 0 and 255. But let's just do 100 first for the background. Do it. So it's a dark gray. 0 is going to be black, and 255 is going to be white. So let's do dark gray. That's fine. So we have a black background color of 100, which is like a dark gray. If we wanted to, we could change the size of the canvas itself. So let's make it a width of like 600 by 500. And so you can make the canvas a different size too. And let's just draw a rectangle. Let's do it at 50x, 75y, 100 width, 120 height. Cool. So we got a rectangle there. Do an ellipse too. Let's do it at 300x, 200y, and let's make it a circle. So 30 by 30. Cool. So we got a rectangle and a circle. What else do you guys want to do? Any requests? Star. Oh, tricky. Let's do a triangle for now. The star is a little bit more challenging. So a triangle. Again, you need 3 points. So you need an X and a Y for each point. I like drawing a triangle from the 0, 0 point just for my own sanity. And then I can move it after the fact using another function called translate. So let's do a 0, 0 first. Let's do 0, 0 first. So 0, 0. The next point, let's go over like 50, the X, and down 25. And then for the last point, let's do 0 for the X and down 50. See if that works. Okay, cool. So we got a triangle up there. A rhombus. Ooh, I don't know, what is a rhombus? I don't remember. Rhombus. Okay, like a quadrilateral or something. We do quads. I think it's the same thing as a triangle. Let's see. Reference. Quad. Yeah, so it's the same thing as a triangle. It's just 4 X and Y positions. So I'm just gonna, for my own sanity, copy and paste those values and make it that way. Yeah, I like the challenge. I appreciate it. Thank you. So why don't we play around with color? We could do that too. So if we wanted, right now by default, these are all just white fills with like a black stroke around it. So let's just do add a fill. And again, same thing as a background is between 0 and 255. So if we wanted to make it black, we just do 0. And they're all black. We want to make it white, it's 255 and arrange a grayscale in between. But let's play around with color. So by default, P5 defaults to RGB, so red, green, and blue. So, and again, it's the same range between 0 and 255. So let's do red at 0, green at 200, and blue at, I don't know, 50. Let's see what happens. All right, so we get a greenish, the tint of blue. But as you notice, it kind of gets applied to everything. The fill gets applied to everything below it. So one thing to remember about P5 is that it runs in order. So whatever's first, it's going to be run first and then apply to anything below it. So if we move the fill down below the ellipse, then it's the triangle and quad are going to be green, but everything else is going to stay white. So order matters with P5. And then if you wanted to overwrite it, so let's say we wanted the triangle and quad to be a different color, you just have to overwrite it and give it a different fill. Let's make it red or something very Christmassy. Yeah. And you got a shape in the middle of the canvas. Yes. So positioning for rectangles and ellipses are all about the first 2 values. So an X and a Y, the first 2 values. Triangles and quads are a little bit more complex because you have to draw the X and Y position for each point. So for that, I would do something using like a translate function, which is translating the position from where it currently is to a different location. So I could say, and you could do, there's things called global variables. We're kind of getting into the weeds here, but we're going to talk a little bit more in detail about this in the coming, probably next week, actually, next lecture video. But there's global variables that we could use called like width and height. So if you do width, it's going to be the 600 value. If you do height, it's going to be the 500 value. And it'll change based off of these values. If I change this to 700, then width will be 700, be equal to 700. So if we do width divided by 2 and height divided by 2, then it'll automatically move it to the center point. And then you can do the same thing for the rect or the circle too. If you put another shape on top of another one. So again, yeah, this is all about positioning. So if we wanted the circle to be on top of the rectangle, then we could say, okay, do this at the 50 and 75 point for X and Y, and then it'll just be on top. And again, it's all about the order. So it draws the rectangle, then it draws the ellipse. So if the ellipse was first, then the rectangle will be on top of it. That makes sense? Any other questions? queries, requests. There's no shadow. There is a stroke around all of these by default. If you wanted to get rid of that, then there's another function called no stroke that you can use, and it's just going to take the stroke off of it. Or let's say I wanted a stroke on the quad, and you can say, give me a stroke that is 5 pixels wide. I'll give you a stroke. Actually, that's color. So that would be, say it's white. Let's give it a white stroke. And then we could do stroke weight for the thickness, 5 pixels. That's a thick stroke around it. Oh God, custom shapes and images. Yeah, you can do custom shapes. Again, we'll talk about that in the week 2 lecture video. But using vertex points, you can do an array of X and Y points that'll draw your more complex shape for you. But you have to draw those points and coordinates for that shape. And then, yes, you can import raster images as well, but we won't get to that for another couple weeks. Yeah, you can change the color of the stroke. So again, let's say we want it to be green. Then we just do RGB instead of grayscale. Red, green, blue. There's a green stroke. So yeah, so the possibilities are endless when it comes to what you can create. Some things are more complicated, like if you wanted to draw a complex illustration of something, then yes, that's going to be a challenge to do because you have to draw it point by point and define the curves if there are any curves. So you have to create your own Bezier curves for anything that has curves in it. So that can get complex, but it's definitely doable. Cool. So I don't want to go too deep into it because we're going to cover a lot of this in the coming weeks, and I don't want you to get like too overwhelmed right now. I just wanted you to show you the basics and get you accustomed to the interface, which you're going to be playing around with like next week. Cool. Any other questions? All right. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing because I think that was the only thing that, or stop recording because I think that was the only thing that's necessary. Yeah, we'll talk about the homework in a second, but it's more about exploring what's already been created and exploring the p5js website and getting accustomed to the editor. So just kind of getting your bearings with everything is the homework assignment. And then also watching the week 2 lecture video before we meet next week. But you don't have to do the week 2 assignment. That's going to be due the following week. I know that's complicated and confusing, but if you want to do it now, that's fine, but it's not going to be due until week 3. Okay, let me stop sharing or stop recording.